Hello and welcome to our Sophia Wealth Academy's Wise Money Talks webinar series. On behalf of Tracy Themes and myself, Kamal Basra, we'd like to welcome you to tonight's session. There is a chat feature in the group, and we'd like to have everyone identify where you're calling in from. So if you would take a moment and tell us your name and where you're logging in from. But also, please notice that change the setting to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your comment. As a side note, we'll also be recording this webinar and we'll be sending you a link in the coming days so you can reference it and feel free to share it with others who you might think it may benefit. And if you have a question for Carrie at the end of the webinar, she'll be taking some questions and answers. And how you ask the question is by hitting the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen window and typing in your question there. And we'll try to get through as many as we can before the end of the session. And with all that being said, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to our wonderful webinar speaker, Carrie Gallant. I've known Carrie for about, well, more than 10 years, and she's a good friend of mine. And an amazing speaker. When Carrie became a lawyer, she discovered that she sucked at negotiation and resolving conflict. After reclaiming an $8,000 equal pay gap, she became a mediator and a negotiation nerd, an adjunct law professor in negotiation. And for fun, she loves to mountain bike and occasionally trains for the Spartan races. So with that, Carrie, welcome.
Thank you, Kamal. I am so excited and delighted to be here with you all today, and I love seeing all the names popping up in chat and where you're all calling in from today. And you know, as Kamal said, I wasn't always good at negotiation. It's a myth, if anyone believes it, that lawyers are born negotiators, because we're not. In fact, when I was an adjunct professor at UBC Law, I was teaching a very small segment of the population about negotiation. So very few lawyers actually get exposed to any negotiation training during law school. Now, we're here to talk about love and negotiation for the lovers and not the fighters. And so that's what we're going to be really diving into today, is how can we love negotiation and how can we use it to be more loving than to be more fighting in our negotiations. So I hope you have a fun time as we go through the different segments in our presentation today. And as Kamal said, we're going to take some questions at the end, but please feel free to let us know what your questions are using the Q&A button. Now, as you've gotten to know a little bit about me, and I know some of you I've met before, you know a little bit more about my story, but I want to know about you. So we're going to put a poll question up here on the Zoom and asking you, what do you think about when you hear negotiation? So there's 4 answers here in our poll. If you can see the poll, please go ahead and start to vote. Click on the one that applies to you. What do you think of when you hear negotiation? Do you think, oh, if I hide, it'll go away? Like an ostrich, you want to put your head in the sand? Or do you think, oh my God, this will be so much fun? Or do you think, oh my God, I'd rather have a root canal? Or perhaps you think about it as like a game. It's like a game like playing chess. So go ahead and select the one that resonates for you. What do you think of when you think of negotiation? I'm going to take some of those votes. You can go ahead. If you don't see the poll on your screen, I see, yes, Gary's actually put the answer, his answer in the chat. You can go ahead and put it in the chat. Would you rather hide, run away, or do you think it's going to be fun? Or would you rather have a root canal? Or maybe you think of it's more like a game like chess. So go ahead and share with us. My apologies, we've gone a little bit ahead there. Oh dear, okay. And Sandy, I don't know if you're seeing any of the poll thing. There we go, she's closed the poll. I couldn't see any of the things coming in. All right, so we got a great proportion tonight that think of it as a game like chess. And a number of you think they'd rather run away and hide. A couple of you think it's going to be fun, and one of you said it'd rather be a root canal. Well, this is an interesting, because I know that Gary's here. Now, I don't know who else has answered it as a game like chess, that you look at it as like a game. But typically, when I ask this question in a female audience, and it's actually borne out by some of the research, typically women will perceive negotiation as something they'd rather not have, like a root canal. the liken it to a root canal, whereas men are more typically inclined to equate it to more like a game. Now, why do I ask these questions? Well, first of all, I want to find out who's here and who's got some predilections for how they perceive negotiation. Also, because how we think about negotiation, how we perceive it, is often how we're going to be in negotiation, right? So if we're afraid of negotiation, we're likely going to be like this woman here on the screen. We might have a lot of anxiety around negotiation. In fact, the research shows that women are twice as likely as men to feel anxiety about negotiation. Now, okay, so let me say, oh gosh, I'm twice as likely. What does that mean? Well, here's the good part about the research, actually. It shows that in the US, 52% of people feel anxious when it comes to negotiation. And you might think, okay, well, so what? I feel a little anxious. Why wouldn't I feel anxious about negotiation? Well, here's the thing. When we do have anxiety about something, that tends to affect how we respond in the situation because it gets into our fight, flight, and freeze part of our brain. And so we go into some of those old patterns that we might have that might conduce us to get into that fighting mode in our negotiations. So it might bring that about when we might not actually want it to. So that's why we want to know, how do you think about negotiation? Because that might even be able to affect that tonight. So what I want to share with you before we go any further is a little bit about where we're going to go. So just make sure I've got my, all right, we're gonna have to go with another methodology to move this slide forward. There we go. This is where we're going tonight. We're going to take a look at some of the definitions of negotiation as well as some key mindsets that can help support you for success. I'm going to share with you the #1 mistake in negotiations, and as well a 5-step negotiation blueprint. And I'm going to share with you as much as I can in the short time that we have together tonight. And I know that some of you are going to want to take this a bit further. So I promise that I'm going to share with you before we close today how you can do that. So that'll be in our next steps. So let's take a look at, okay, Sophia, you're asking how you come you can't see the attendees. We're in webinar mode here, so it's about you're being able to see this as myself as a speaker and Kamal as well, and also the slides. So what you can see is who's attending here in the chat when the people are participating in the chat. Okay, great, thank you. All right, so what is negotiation anyway? How do we define it? There's lots of definitions about negotiation out there, and this particular one is all too common, how we might define negotiation, that we're going to get into a battle or a fight or an argument and feel that we have to win that battle or that argument or that fight, right? Because this presentation is for the lovers, not the fighters, right? So let's take a look at a couple other definitions I'd like to share with you. So again, how we define negotiation is also how we look at negotiation. And this also includes, different things like a conversation, right? Negotiation takes place in a conversation. It really is a conversation. Now, some of the times it might feel like a difficult conversation. It still is a conversation at its very basic core level. It's a conversation like all the other conversations we have. It shares that in common. Negotiation is also about navigating a relationship. Now think about it. All of your negotiations that you do, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, of all the negotiations that you do, how many of them are one-off? You might call it a one-off. Like, I'm never going to meet this person again. I'm never going to be in the same circle as this person again. There's no way that what I say today is going to ever have any impact on anything else that happens to me again in the future. Right? How many of you can say that that's your negotiations? Probably not many, right? Most of our negotiations, yep, somebody says nope, right? Most of our negotiations take place in the context of a relationship. Maybe a pre-existing relationship, like think about employment, for example. You're with your boss or your employees. That's one that we hope is going to be an ongoing relationship. Some of our negotiations tend to be short-term, like maybe we're negotiating for a car. We might not see this person again. But if you're in Vancouver, while it might be perceived to be a large city, is actually a rather small city if you know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, right? Everybody that's here tonight knew somebody to get here. So how often can we say that what we do today is not going to impact what we do tomorrow? So it's always about navigating a relationship. Now, another way we can think about defining negotiation is that when we need or want someone else's cooperation in order to achieve something, that's also a negotiation. It's about what we need, because we do things in these relationships. We're doing things in concert or conjunction with another person. And some way we need their cooperation in order to achieve our goal. Now, a final way I want to share with you, it's not the only final way, but another way to look at negotiation is that it's about an exchange of value, right? I have something that you would like, and you have something that I would like. And so we might get into an exchange of value, right? So we see that typically when we're talking about money, right? We're talking about wise money talks tonight. And so money itself, if you've been to any of the sessions that Tracy and Kamal have offered in Sophia before, you know that money has its own energy. And that energy can often be a sticky energy. And so that can really kind of affect our negotiations. Also, this word value can also have a sticky effect, especially for women. We can think, oh, well, I don't know my value, or what if I don't have any value, or maybe my value's not enough, and we can get wrapped up in our minds about what that means. And there's lots of reasons for that. You know, there's lots of reasons for why women in particular might have a specific reaction to value and be concerned about that, or feel that their worthiness is being called into play. You know, we have a lot of societal history, preconceived notions about what it means to be a woman, what a woman should do, what a woman shouldn't do. And by the way, so we also have these ideas about men too. It's just that for women, we tend to have them, and they're more on that kind of lesser than way of thinking about things. You know, we've had millennia of years of women surviving only because there was a relationship with a man, whether it was her father, her brother, or her husband. And so we can get sticky around this notion of an exchange of value because we might not be clear what our value is. So the question is, how do we find out? That's what we want to focus on, is focusing on, okay, well, if this is about an exchange of value, then I want to know more about what my value is. And that's certainly something you want to be inquiring into. Here's the thing. If we don't make this inquiry, if we don't know, if we don't own that we have value, we get into this mess that Oprah talks about. When you undervalue what you do, the world will undervalue who you are. Now, if this quote was from anyone else from Oprah, I probably wouldn't put it on the screen. But you know where Oprah's coming from. She's all about expansion. She's all about growth, and she's all about owning your power and knowing what that is. So this is really important. We want to value what we do. We want to value who we are so that others will. And that's a big component in terms of that exchange of value. We're not going to dive too deep into that tonight. I did want to bring it to bear because this is an important part of when we get into conversations, when we get into negotiations. Right, and as Sophia Frigang, I hope I pronounced your name right, says, women undervalue who they are because the world undervalues them. Right, it can be that cycle. So we want to break that cycle. We want to break that chain and come back into valuing who you are, valuing what you do. Now, this is interesting because I put this slide up here because it's the idea that there's a disconnect. You know, there's research that shows that women can be as great negotiators as men, and in fact, in some situations can even outperform men. Can be great negotiators when they're negotiating for someone else, right? So I had this happen to me when I started talking about negotiation for women. I don't know, Kamal, it was probably about 15 years ago. And I would have this conversation with women who were senior partners in law firms, who were top of their game as sales professionals, like regional, national, winning the prizes for sales negotiations. And when I told them I was talking about negotiation for women, they said, you know, it's really funny that you do, because I might be really good at my job and I can negotiate the pants off anyone else when it comes to my organization, my family, my team. But I can't negotiate for myself out of a paper bag. How many of you does that resonate with? Go ahead and type yes in chat if this is familiar to you, or this resonates with you as a personal story. Yeah, right? Now, you're not alone, right? You're not alone because you can see the yeses. You can see the yeses. You can hear it in my anecdote, the story that I was learning. Well, after I had a lot of these stories come, I came across some research that proves that this is actually a thing. this is actually a thing. There's a disconnect, this disconnect between I'm really good at what I do but I can't negotiate for myself, only for women. There is no similar disconnect for men, according to the research, the studies. So whatever type of negotiator a man is, he tends to be the same in both situations. Whereas for women, we can be great, we can have the skill set, we can have the mindset for success in negotiations, but when it comes to ourselves, it's a different story. So a lot of that, well, there's lots of different reasons why that can be true. We won't get into all of them tonight. We started to unpack a little bit around that kind of personal worth, personal value, how we're being perceived by others. And it's also a cycle in terms of, as someone else said earlier, how the world sees women when women stand up and ask for what they want, right? So we want to help to break that cycle, both for you individually, but also for other women. So we want to check any biases that we might experience ourselves, because we're not immune to cognitive biases. We're not immune to societal biases just because we're women. We can have that around other women as well. And by the way, this also includes women and people of color, of different races, of different abilities as well. So we want to be cognizant of how we're perceiving how others are, what their worth is and who they are when they stand up for something that matters to them, when they negotiate, when they ask for something. So we're really talking about trying to unpack that disconnect that we see here. Because here's one of the other truths. There are lots of advantages for women in negotiation. Lots of, we might call them natural skill sets. And by the way, whenever we're talking anything natural or that women tend to be good at, we're really talking about how the bulk of women, and there's always going to be a difference, right? There's always going to be, for some this won't be true, but for a majority of women, we can see that women tend to be good at listening to others. Women tend to be known for being empathetic, having that empathy, being good at relationship building. Now, men also tend to be good at relationship building in a different sense. We know that men tend to be really good at relationship building and building their network, because they're good at, what they're good at doing is they're good at turning that network into something that they can build as well. And for women, it tends to be a little bit more challenging to then go ahead and ask for the favor, ask for the business, ask for the job, for all these other reasons we were talking about. Other things women tend to be good at is to be more collaborative. And we're seeing that a lot right now when we're in COVID, right? You can see how a lot of the collaborative leadership that's being ascribed to women leaders in the countries where we're doing well with COVID. We tend to have strong women leaders, their presence in the political structure or here in BC in our health structure as well. And also around standards. So these are some of the advantages that women can experience, can actually parlay in their negotiations. At the end of the day, one of the things we do know, and this is my experience and it's borne out in the research as well, is that when women are empowered, and by that I mean they're empowered with the knowledge, the skill sets, the supports, the practice, the experience, women get great results in negotiation. And Lisa, sometimes it is about being able to ask for anything but money. And that's why you're here today, right? That's why you're engaged with Sophia as well. So quick question around how women are better at standards in negotiation. It's not necessarily in negotiation. The research has shown that women tend to rise to higher ethical standards. When we saw the whistleblowers back in the mid-2000s, if you recall, any of you who recall seeing the front cover of Time magazine, every one of those whistleblowers was a woman. So when this is one of the reasons why diversity of opinion, diversity of gender on boards, in companies tends to do well for the bottom line, because women bring in a different perspective, and standards, ethical standards in particular, tends to be one of them. Now, that doesn't mean we're pure as the driven snow 100% of the time. I don't want to get down a track on there, but that's what the research tends to show. So we can see that these are some strengths and some advantages that many women can parlay in their negotiations. So I want to share with you some of the other things that we can now parlay. First, I want to find out a bit more from you. We're going to throw up another poll to ask you and find out, what are your common negotiations? Now, I just remembered that I think with this poll, you may only be able to answer one question. So if more than one of these answers applies to you, then please use the chat and let us know. What are your common negotiations? Are they with your employees or with your leaders, like in an employment setting? Or are they with your spouse, children, or family? Or perhaps they're with vendors, maybe for your own business or within the business that you work for. Or perhaps they're with customers. Maybe you're in sales. Or are they with funders? Bank loans or VC investment, venture capital. Or perhaps they're with business partners. What kinds of negotiations are you involved with? Let us know here. We see some in the chat coming out here as well. Thank you for sharing that. And Sandy, whenever you feel that you've got enough, you can share the results with us of our poll. All right. Okay, so definitely the employment situation is for a third of you, and over half of you, of course, are with spouses and children and family, recognizing that. A couple of you with customers and a couple of you with business partners. And I see some information broken down on here. Kids, adult daughters and clients, right? Family clients, recently negotiating a raise. Former husband, right? That can include in family, I suppose, depending on how you like to look at that. Yes, and rent and home expenses, right? We're drilling it down a little bit more in terms of the types of things that you might be negotiating over. This is great. So the idea here is that we're looking at really, we have so many types of negotiations in our lives. We don't want to just get fixated on one type. I'm often asked to talk about salaries, for example. And even in that context, that's very narrow because salary is typically only one item on the table when it comes to a job negotiation or a promotion. So we're actually talking about a fairly complex negotiation when we're talking about employment negotiations. And we have so many other negotiations that take place on a day-to-day basis that really we are negotiating almost every day and almost all day in some cases, right? We're looking to influence an outcome. We're looking to influence a person towards a different decision or a different action or something like that. So lots of things there. So, and Sandy has shared the poll results there as well. All right, let's keep going here. And I've got to get my thing back here. There we go. And here's a list again of some of the common negotiations that we can also see on here. Under personal, I put home or car, and of course, marriage as well. If you've been hanging around Sophia for long, you know that this is one that they talk about, that we want to be negotiating the terms of our relationships. We want to be thinking ahead to what is it that we want to have happen and what is it that we don't want to have happen. Which actually leads me now into the next part of our presentation. And first I want to share with you the top mistake in negotiation. Drum roll. What do you think it is? Let's hear you in the chat and see, what do you think it is? What would be the top mistake in negotiation? What do you think? What's the top mistake? Okay, we're seeing taking it personally. That's a good one. Accepting the status quo, talking, okay, trying to win, assumptions, and lack of communication skills, not negotiating, right? Undervaluing yourself. You know what? These are all things, not being confident. These are all things that can block your results, that can impact your results. And I'm going to share with you this number one mistake because this is exactly one of the ways that you can turn it all around. Okay? Very close. The number one mistake in negotiation is focused on execution. When we're focused on all these things, we're thinking about being in the room with them. We're thinking about what we're going to say. We're thinking about what they're going to say. We're thinking about, what if they tell us this? What if I blow up? What if I can't get my emotions? We're always thinking about execution. This is where the rubber hits the road. This is where the most leverage you can gain if you do this one thing, and that's preparation. Right? 80% of your outcome is governed by what you do before you even get into that crucial conversation with somebody. It doesn't have to take you a million years. It's what you do to prepare before you have your negotiation. By the way, I didn't make this number up. There is research that shows that this is 80-20 rule, that when you have to pay 80% of your time in preparation, but 80% of your results come from your preparation. And the preparation isn't just going through the numbers and preparing what we call the content of your negotiation. You want to be thinking about the process, how the conversation is going to go. And then the model I'm going to share with you, the first 3 steps in this blueprint, are what you would do in preparation. It helps set you up so that you would feel confident. so that you would be prepared to ask, even if you're anxious about it, even if it scares the bejesus out of you and makes you uncomfortable. You know, we can't grow if we don't get uncomfortable. So let's get into that preparation. So the first step in our blueprint is to clarify, because we amplify when we clarify. So we want to clarify a number of things. So I'll give you a really quick way to do this. Your clarification is, what do I want? So what do I want? And that can be, what do I want in terms of if it's about money, what am I looking for? What are the other things I'm looking for? What kind of process do I want? What do I want to feel at the end of this? So that's kind of also the emotional part of it. Who does it impact? Who does this outcome impact, this outcome that you're looking to achieve? What you want? Who does it impact? And then thirdly, why is that important to you, right? So why is it important? What do you want? Who does it impact? And why is it important? Right? If you can do that little bit at the beginning to really crystallize that clarity, there's so much power in being clear. And I'm emphasizing this because one of the areas that, particularly as women, we can let ourselves down is by not letting ourselves get clear. You know, we're so busy taking other people's feelings into account. We're so busy worried about what they're going to feel, how they're going to respond, that we forget to do what the flight attendant in the plane always tells us. Maybe not for the last 6 months because we're not flying anywhere, but what does he or she always tell us? We need to put the oxygen mask on first so that we can breathe in order to help someone else. So you're no good to anyone else if you're not also taking care of your own needs. The same is true here in negotiation. Take the time, take the step back to get clear, to have this clarity. All right, so when you've done that, this is part of your preparation. You're thinking ahead, you're doing the work to get this clarity. One of the reasons why this is so important, and especially going into that why question, why is it important and who does it impact? You know, I worked with Deb here a while back, and she said at the end of it, she said, you know, this was so critical to have this conversation with you because I realized I was holding myself back because I didn't want to let my team down. I didn't want to ask for more for me because I didn't think it was fair to them. What she hadn't seen until she did this exercise was she hadn't seen how much her leadership was dependent on her asking ahead of time that she be the leader for herself, but also her family. She realized that the very people she cared about the most were the ones that she was depriving because of this moral sense she had about putting other people's needs before her own, but not getting that level of clarity. So it changed a lot for her. So this is so important to have that deeper why. Now, another place we also want to be thinking about is, how do you think about the other person? You know, when you think about getting into a negotiation or a difficult conversation with somebody, how do you think about them? Even if you've dealt with them before, what do you tend to think about them? Let's hear some names in chat. What do you tend to think about them? What's a name, like a word you might use to ascribe to them? You know, some of us might think, oh, they're my adversary. How many of you think of that? If you could put adversary in chat, if that sounds like something you've thought of before. You might think of them, as Jennifer says, as a high conflict individual. All of a sudden, just because you're in a negotiation, they all of a sudden become a high conflict individual, right? We tend to put them in the other box. And we know, if anything we know through COVID and through this time of separation, is when we put people in the other box, and Black Lives Matter and everything that's happened with that, we know that we tend to put a block between us, right? So when we don't want to necessarily be thinking about that, pain in the arse, that you might think that they have more power. The other words that tend to be ascribed in negotiations is opponent, right? I'm meeting with my opponent. I'm going to negotiate with my opponent, my adversary. So I wanted to offer you a competitor. Maybe we now all of a sudden see them as our competitor. We might have been friends with them yesterday. We might have been doing business with them yesterday, but all of a sudden now we're in negotiation, right? And what does that do? What do you think that does to the outcome? What does it do to your intention? What does it do to the way your brain is now thinking, the words that are going to come out of your mouth, the emotions that you're going to experience? Remember I said back at the beginning, anxiety lives in the back of our brain, in our lizard brain, in that fight, flight, and freeze place. It's in cortisol, When we think of somebody as the enemy, we tend to get a lot of cortisol coming through our system, which is the stress hormone. So I want to offer you a different frame of mind. What if you could look at them as your potential partner? What if you could be an ally? What if they could be your potential partner to achieving an outcome together? Yeah, you might have different opinions today or right now, but maybe you can get there together, right? If we don't tend to look down the road together at the same time, side by side, we're off in different directions, doing different things. So number 2 is to connect with them, to partner and profit as a result of that connection, that human connection. And lots of ways we can have that human connection. We can reach out to them and say, hey, Jim, I know we've got this conversation coming up in a couple of weeks. I just want to check in with you that we're on track and we've got the dates. We might want to check in on logistics. We wanted to find out what we have, what do we share? What do I know about this person? We want to, again, be building that relationship, right? Even if it's a short-term relationship, we still want to build that rapport. And think of them, I like this word, Janet, colleagues. Think of them already as your colleague, not your competitor, not your opponent, not your adversary, your colleague and your partner. So it's a mindset that will help to pull you forward into a different kind of conversation, one that will draw you forward into the third one, which we'll get to in a minute. But I want to share this tip because I'm often asked, well, how do I do that? What if I haven't met with them before? Or I don't know how they're going to react. What do I do if I'm thinking about this in that preparation area? Well, you want to get curious. Just imagine. Again, if you are strong on empathy, this is a great time to pull it into play and say, what would be, I'll ask the same 3 questions, right? What do they want? And who does it impact for them? Maybe they have a constituency or somebody they have to answer to with regards to how this negotiation ends up, right? Maybe their boss, maybe their spouse. And why is it important to them? So get curious and be thinking about this ahead of time, because that gives you an idea of what will happen in the negotiation. It gives you an idea of what's going to matter to them in terms of making a shift and maybe coming closer to where you'd like to go, right? Say you're negotiating to go out for dinner and you want to go out to have dinner in the park, and the other person, they want to go to a fancy restaurant that's going to cost a lot more money than having a dinner in the park with, say, a DoorDash delivery. So you want to get curious about why is that going to matter to them right now? What is it they're trying to achieve with that? So we get curious. And then we can move into the third step, because we've built those first 2. We've clarified what we want. We've amplified that. We're going to talk about that in just a second. We've connected with them as a partner, as a potential colleague. Now we can focus on collaborating to get to yes. So the collaboration is then, how do we build on that commonality? What can we look at in terms of building things that are common? How can we achieve this together? Really focus on that collaboration. Then we get to number 4, which is all about crafting the conversation. Now there's more detail here, and I've got the diamond shape on here. This is where I kind of say, diamonds really are a woman's best friend, especially when it comes to negotiation, because this is about the shape of the conversation. Because it starts at the peak of the diamond with an opener. And this is what I work through with my clients, is we talk about how we're going to open that conversation. How you start a conversation is literally almost always how it's going to end. So the openers are super important. And then during the course of the conversation, we're pulling on these 3 key skill sets. Inquiry, again, getting that curiosity. So we do that through question strategy. And listening, of course, right? We want to be listening to what's coming forward. We might be learning new information about the situation, but also about them, about what's important to them. We also, and this is super important for women, we also want to be drawing on our advocacy, our self-advocacy, to be sure that we are, as much as we're listening, as much as we have empathy and trying to figure out how it's affecting them, we also want to be in there with what we've clarified, right? We want to be in there with our own wants, that self-advocacy. And then we're moving into a place of exploring and exchanging, right? We talked about the value exchange. The exploring is looking at where are we similar, where do we have things in common, where are we at in the same mind on something, and where are we different? And we want to be sure, because we want to be able to explore those differences. If we don't explore those differences in a negotiation or a conflict situation, it's kind of like shoving everything under the rug. And at the end saying, okay, we're done, let's shake our hands, we got a deal. But if we haven't dealt with those differences, guess what happens? Guess where they come back? They come back to bite you in the you-know-where later because they haven't been resolved. They haven't been resolved. When we get through this part, then we move into our last part, which is coming to an agreement. And that leads us to we're going to get to the other part in just a second. I got some quick success secrets I wanted to share with you. One of these for women is about balancing that self-advocacy with communality. So we know that women, we have a society view of what women are, that we're all about community, we're all about togetherness, we do things with others and for others. And so in our language, we want to balance that self-advocacy with communality. It's a hard one to say. So I like to talk about this simply as balancing the I, what I want, with the we, right? I'm looking to achieve this because I know that we can achieve something greater as a result. Or I'm looking to achieve this because I want to be able to expand my team so that we can work together better. And when we bring the we in, then we're balancing that self-advocacy with communality. This other one here, this is about this boat that's anchored here, right? Look how close to the shore it is. Now we know in Vancouver, especially if you lived around Kitsilano and some of the areas where people anchor, that if you anchor too close to shore, you could be in trouble when a storm comes, right? Well, what we want to do is we want to drop your anchor out as far as you dare. Now, what do I mean by anchor? Anchoring is a psychological phenomenon. It's present everywhere, not just in negotiation. It's present the moment you walk into Walmart and you see that sign that says lowest price at 97 cents or $97 or whatever seven it is. That's anchoring because it's planting a seed in your mind that, A, this is what it's worth. So going back to our value proposition earlier, you want to drop your anchor out as far as you dare because you can't get back there if you're too close to shore and a storm comes up and wipes out your boat, right? So you want to drop your anchor out as far as you dare. Oops, going the wrong way here. And then stop talking. Once you position your ask, just stop talking. There's a couple of reasons for this. One is that the other person may need time to process what you've just said, what you've just asked. Another one is women are known statistically to use more words than men. So if you're in a cross-gender negotiation, it's really important that you stop because we tend to want to justify what we've just asked for. And when we start to justify more and more and more, it starts to dilute the ask. Let it land. Let it land. Let them think about it. They might come back and give you an answer that you don't want, but you can still move on from there, right? You can still move on from there. And that brings me to this one. What if they say no, right? What if they say no, or the variations that no sounds like, oh, that's the best we can do, or we've heard this in organizations before, we've always done it the other way, we're not going to change now, things like that. We see different language that could mean no. Okay, so what does no mean? Does it mean never? When you reach a stop sign in traffic, what do? Well, I hope you stop. But after you've stopped, what do you do next? Right? You look both ways, and when it's safe to go, you proceed. Same thing here. No does not have to stop it forever. It means no, not right now. It could be better tomorrow. It could be better when you add some more information. It means they don't get the value in this second. So we've got some more work to do. And so that's why I say here, you want to think about no as resistance. When somebody puts up a no, or what sounds like a no, they're resisting what it is you're wanting to achieve. If you persist, however, balancing self-advocacy with communality, if you continue to balance that resistance with your persistence, you just might reach the tip of the mountain here and be able to move forward, to continue to move the negotiation forward. Now, I get this question a lot right now because we're in uncertain times, right? How does that affect? Can I negotiate in a pandemic? That's what I heard so much at the beginning. Can I negotiate in a recession? Yes, you can. In fact, now more than ever, you probably do want to be negotiating because things are changing. The terms of agreements might be changing. The situation is changing for you as well as for them. And so all this means is that there's another type of situation at play. Let's go back to our clarity and our connect to partner. As you think about those questions, what's important to you right now? What's important to them right now? It might be different than it was a month or two ago or 6 months ago. All it means is it's just a different situation. It doesn't mean you stop negotiating. You want to be having these conversations to figure out, okay, what do we do now? How do we want to behave? How do we want to be? And then this part is so important at this stage, and as part of your preparation, is you're thinking about that conversation, is rehearsal. The value of rehearsal in that 80% that I shared with you earlier is huge, right? We want to do a couple of different takes to try things out. How does this sound? Now, what does rehearsal look like? Rehearsal could mean, you get together with a friend or a coach like me, like my client here. This is what she did. We did a rehearsal one-on-one. This is a while ago, but we can do it online too. I've done that with other clients. Is you get the role play, the value of the role play is you get the practice. You get to feel what it feels like to say these things. And because of rehearsal, when you do rehearsal in a certain way, where you try to bring in the reality, the verisimilitude, if you like, of someone who can play the other person's part, understanding what their motivations might be because you're doing that preparation, right? Then we can start to see how you might need to react a little bit differently with this person than you might with that person, and those kinds of things. So the value of rehearsal is huge. Now, we don't necessarily always have to go through a formal getting together with somebody and going through all this role play type of thing. We can even do it up here, right? We can rehearse it mentally. We can see and visualize ourselves having this conversation. I've done this many times with good effect in my negotiations, my difficult conversations. Because one of the things I hear over and over again with clients when we do rehearsal is after the fact, they come back and they say, you know what, it happened just like we rehearsed. Because they get it out of their mouth too. This is a muscle right here, this lip and the tongue. And if you're not used to saying certain words and in a certain way, your whole jaw can just clench up and you won't be able to get the words out, right? It can be literally that way. Performers know this to be true. High-level athletes do this kind of mental visualization in order to achieve the results they want. Why not you? Be a negotiation athlete, do rehearsal. And then number 5, when we get there with our agreements, or even if we're saying we're agreeing to disagree, we still want to get here. We want to get to this place of committing and celebrating. So when we get to commitment, we want to be able to seal the relationship, right? Most people want to get there and just shake hands and just so-called seal the deal. Well, we want to seal the relationship too, through appreciation of what we've done, what we've been able to achieve, and what we might do next time, especially when our negotiations take place in the context of an ongoing relationship. We want to be able to seal that relationship. We also want to plan the implementation, right? If we just shake our hands and say a deal's done, I'm done. Well, if it requires you to do something, or it requires them to do something, how do you know that's going to happen? So part of this stage is about planning that implementation. I like this phrase, negotiate as if implementation matters. So right from the beginning, you're actually planning the implementation because you're seeing it through to the finish line. Okay, this is my last little tip here, is to get it in writing. Now, this doesn't have to be a 50-page contract. It could be an email that says, hey, Jane, I'm so glad we had an opportunity to negotiate our agreement today. This is what I recall us agreeing to. Boom, boom, boom. Is that what you remember? She writes back and says, well, actually, I remember point 5 being slightly different. Here's what I remember. That allows you to get some little tweaks in there for that agreement. It also gives you something in writing, right? It doesn't have to be a big 50-page contract unless that's what's appropriate in the situation. So again, we come back to this notion of when women are empowered to negotiate, they get great results. They represent their organization at the table. They build stronger customer and stakeholder relationships and feel more invested and engaged versus feeling underpaid, undervalued, underappreciated, and overwhelmed. And they show up powerfully as a strong leader. Like Alice, she said that, her negotiation set a new benchmark for the rest of her career, even though before she was willing to accept whatever was being offered. She was willing to say yes automatically, right? And now, most importantly, she says, now I have the confidence to take my seat at the table, not at the outer ring, but at the table. So there we go. There's our 5 steps all in one place here from 1 through 5. I wanted to show that to you all together. And I promised I was going to share with you a little bit more. And of course, we want to celebrate, right? I want to celebrate you for coming here today and for sharing your questions and sharing what's up for you in negotiations. And I promised I was going to share with you what's next for those of you, because I know some of you are going to want to take this information and learn a bit more about it or take it a bit further. There's a number of different things that we do here beyond speaking on a webinar. And I have something special I want to share with you. If you're interested in learning more about you and your capacity in negotiation right now, I have a free assessment called the Negotiation Competencies Assessment. I've created these 10 competencies, and you can get a free score on where you are today. It's a fairly comprehensive. And as well, if you're interested in taking it further to have a conversation about what it's like to work with me, you can actually click right on the screen here on the breakthrough session, and it should take you right through. I'm going to pop these links into the chat in just a moment. And please feel free to follow up with me on LinkedIn. Just look me up on Google, and that's probably going to be the top thing that's going to come in your search. And on Instagram and Twitter, my handle is @GallantLeader, and that's also my website. So that's our presentation for today, and I want to turn it over to our Q&A period and find out some of your questions. I know that Sandy's been collecting them for us. Let's see if I can.
Hello. So Carrie, we've got some questions coming in. And the first one is from Lorena. She asks, what do you do if someone agrees to do something, then reneges on it and says that they have a right to change their minds?
That's a great question, because right off the bat, it sets it up as though, oh, well, what am I supposed to do now, right? It sets it up as that resistance I was talking about in a way, because they're kind of saying, don't step any closer, right? I have a right to change my mind. Well, of course they have a right to change their mind. So what you want to do is think about, okay, what is it that they agreed to? First of all, if there's a contract at all, you can always point to the contract and say, well, I have paper here that you agreed to doing it this way. What's happened? Because we don't know necessarily what's happened in the background. So it might be about what's happened. They might have suffered something that means they can't meet the terms of what they agreed to. And they might be embarrassed or feel shame that they can't do it. So if we approach them again as a colleague, as someone who's a partner in this agreement, in this thing that you've agreed to do together, then that can help a lot, right? That emotional connection and how they may respond to you differently than if you try to approach them, if you were to approach them and say, but you agreed. So again, that's approaching in the adversarial sense. Now, I'm not saying that's not appropriate in some circumstances. Sometimes it is. Sometimes we need to meet that with a strong, and you agreed to do this, so I want to know what you're going to do to make it right today. So you have to judge the situation as to what's appropriate there. I encourage you to come back to that idea, though, of what if you could approach them as a partner in this agreement, and what it is that's happening for them that's making it hard for them to meet what they agreed to do. I hope that's helpful.
Great. We had a question about whether the attendees will be receiving the slides, and yes, you'll be receiving a link over the next few days with this presentation, with a link to the recording and the slides. Another question, Carrie, is from Jen, and the question is, how can you have a conversation about finances with your partner who has made it pretty clear that he really doesn't want to talk about it?
That's a great question too. How do you have a conversation about finances with your partner when he's made it clear he doesn't want to talk about it? So this is, it could be perhaps a bit more delicate in terms of the conversational approach. I'm not sure if it's a business partner or a personal, intimate relationship partner. Either way, I think it would be important to approach them and say something along the lines of, you know, Bob, I know you don't want to talk about money here, and let's take the butt out for a second. I know you don't want to talk about money. Can you share? You might want to actually go into explore. Can you share with me why you don't want to talk about money, or what makes it difficult? And then if they balk at that, you must say, because you know it's really important to me that we have this conversation, and here's why, and lay out why it's important to you that you have the conversation, right? And it might include something like, I need your partnership to be able to achieve this thing that's important to me. So I need to have this conversation. And I know you might not be ready to have it right now. I'd like you to think about it, that's if that's appropriate. When would be a good time that we can sit down and have this conversation? You know, and even what do you need to be able to have a conversation? Money is a really tricky thing for a lot of people. And Kamal's smiling. You know, there's so much emotion. There's so much story involved with money. And it's such an important conversation. It's such an important conversation. So I encourage you, approach it as that partnership. If they are your partner, approach it with that. I hope that's helpful.
And how do you handle difficult family members or people who you know they're not open to mediation or negotiation? How do you deal with that, Carrie?
Okay, so so I'm curious. I'm curious about how you know they're not open to it. So I would, if we were to work together, I'd say, okay, tell me about that. What does that sound like? What do they say? You know, what are they saying or what are they doing that gives you that idea that they're not open to it? So it could be some of the words that they're saying. It could be that habitual pattern, like they're throwing up that no. Again, I would come back to why it's important to you and why it's important in this relationship. Now, I do want to say that in some family relationships, there isn't a place where it's good to do that. You know, that there's actually good reasons to not be trying to delve too deeply into that. Again, I come back to wearing the oxygen mask first. Make sure that you are safe, that you are protected, that this isn't putting you in any kind of danger. But aside from that kind of scenario, you know, if it's important to you that you have this conversation, have the conversation first about that and invite them into that conversation with you. You know, I mean, we have so much in our family dynamics that make it difficult to have some conversations. And so this feeling that they're not open to it might be based on things you've heard or seen in the past, but it might not actually be true for them. So we can make lots of assumptions and stories in our heads about other people, and then we see the evidence that it's true until we get curious, and open that door just a little bit to have that conversation. Maybe not the big one just yet, but let's have that conversation about that it's difficult to talk about. And here's another tip too. It can be as easy as you taking the lead by saying, you know, I'm not very comfortable having a conversation about X. I wonder if that's true for you too. And that might even just open it up quite a bit, is you're laying it out first. That, you know, I know it's uncomfortable. I don't feel that comfortable either. And I'm a little scared about where it might go from here. But I'm committed to us being in this family together. I'm committed that we grow together. You can use language like that. Show what it is that's important to you again, what you hope for.
And what I hear when you say that, Carrie, is that connection. Go back to that connection and building that connection of this is why it's important to me. And this is sort of a follow-up question, similar path. It says, what about having a conversation with your teenager who realizes that everything we say as parents is wrong? And how do we get them to open up?
Great question. You know, I don't have teenagers, and I don't have kids. So, but I've been an aunt since I was 8 years old. So I have a little bit of familiarity about that. It's, you know, I think when we're there. Okay, here's the thing. There's like a core concern that everyone has. We have lots of core concerns, but there's sort of like 5 major core concerns that we all share. One is our affiliation. Where do we belong to? One is appreciation. Do we feel appreciated? Another one is status. Where are we in the pecking order? Now, teens and parents, there's already this kind of potential status dynamic, and it could go this way too. We want to make sure that in our relationships that we're trying to be more on an even keel. And so when people don't feel validated or feel like they belong for themselves or that they're able to be authentic, that can really escalate into some of the things. Now, the affiliation your teenager might be seeking or has experienced is with other teenagers who all say, parents, right? We've all done that. I did that when I was a kid too. We all go through that. And so part of it is being able to even, again, name it. You know, I know you don't think I know much about this, you know? And it's important to me, It's important to us as a family that we figure out how to do X, Y, Z. It's important that we come to a place where we're able to have conversations about ABC. And I'd like to talk to you about that today. So it's up to you to decide what your intention is for that relationship and bring that forward and call them into that space. You know, they are going to become the adults that are going to be running the show very soon. And so part of it is you can even be saying, you know, I know you're going to become an adult. I know you want your freedom, if that's what you're hearing from them. I want to understand more about what that looks like for you today, and I want to help you get there. I'm in your corner. I want to help you to get there. And I can help you if we have conversations. If we can have a conversation about ABC, then let's talk about how we can do this together.
I've got a question from Maria, who says, how do you approach someone whose style is to be a dictator, who's got a big power dynamic difference where someone's used to telling others how things are going to be?
Right. Okay. So this it's an interesting question. It's not the first time I've been asked it. So there's a bunch of different layers here. I might ask. Sometimes this is a personality difference, and I'm not being glib here. Sometimes it literally is how that person, it may be more. So let's say there's many different personality assessments out there that we can talk this through, but there's one that's fairly easy that I can talk about today, and there's four. There's the controller, there's the promoter, there's the supporter, and then there's the analyzer. Okay. Now, if you're a supporter, as we might expect that many women are, but not all women, I'm more of a promoter, promoter controller actually. I was an analyzer while I was a lawyer. I think I really stepped into that one, but I don't think that's really who I am. Anyway, I digress a little bit. If you're a supporter and he's a controller, or even an analyzer, he may come across, I'm assuming it's a man, I just went out there on a big assumption, and I'm sorry if that's not true, because it could just as easily be a woman, so let's use she. If she's a controller or an analyzer, she may come across to a supporter as abrupt and more dictatorial, because it's got to be this way, right? And they're short, because if you go into their office and you want to find out how to give them information, they want to receive it like that too, right? So that's where one layer it could be. Now, let's leave aside that it's that. Maybe it's the other part where that person is used to being in the position of control, used to having their way, having people do what they say. There's still a place in it for them where there might be something else, like that's something else that they might want that they may not be able to talk about. So they may still have those core concerns of affiliation, belonging, appreciation, status. It sounds like they've already got that in spades, perhaps, in terms of their relationship with you at least. And what is it that's also underlying for them? Trying to find a communality with them, like that connection. So when we create that level of rapport and connection with another person, they're much more likely to want to see us do well as well. So there's that aspect of relationship building where we're looking for those things that are in common. Do you have a teenager? Do they have a teenager? Connecting on that level. Even if it's just, you can find out more about their personality if they're more on that controller side versus just the appearance that they are the dictator. Now, having said that, depending on the situation that you're in a relationship with them, you may just simply exercise your choice and leave, right? Depending on that relationship. Now, if that's not where that gets you the answers that you need, and you try everything else, then possibly another place to look at is, do you need someone else to be in that conversation with you? As a representative, as an advocate, as a friend, as a supporter, someone to help navigate that conversation. If it's a sibling or a lawyer, even in some circumstances, that's one of the reasons why we need lawyers, right? We need them to do their jobs as well. There's a place where that's really important to have access to that.
Perfect. And we'll take one final question, Carrie, before we pass along some information about an upcoming event. So this is just a quick, if you can sort of summarize this answer on this one. It's from Anita, and she asks, is it ever appropriate to renegotiate your rate of pay before the end of a contract?
before the end of a contract. Okay, your rate of pay. So that could be an employment situation. It could be a independent contractor situation. I would say, of course, it depends on what it is. You know, like the question of is it's appropriate is an interesting one, because it's appropriate given the circumstances, right? So you can open the conversation, right? Just test the waters. Where are they willing to go? Now, if you're the employee and it's in an employment situation, yeah, it's like going to and saying, you know, I know we've got the end of our contract coming up, but I'm really interested in talking with you about X, Y, and Z or X. Are you open to having a conversation? You can just float it that way and see if they're opening to have a conversation about that. So just because an organization has a policy or a procedure that goes this way and this way and this way doesn't mean you can't ask the question. It might mean that they're unwilling to do anything out of sync with that pattern, and you might be able to establish groundwork for the time when you're in that time frame. Does that make sense? So we don't want to only be waiting until it's time for promotion when we're getting our annual review before we're thinking about our negotiation and the relationships that we want to be building, the connections we want to be building, so that when that time of the year comes around, we've already built the steps on the bridge to be able to cross that bridge. Now, if it's in an independent contractor situation, contracts are agreements. They can be reopened and renegotiated. Again, you want most of them. Now, that depends on the contract itself, right? Often a contract will have the terms for how things can be added on or renegotiated, and you've got to follow a process. That process might include going to a third party like a mediator. So you want to look at the actual contract itself and see what the language says. And again, you can always open a conversation to say, you know, this part isn't working for me anymore. Can we have a conversation about that?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Carrie.
You're
and
welcome.
thank you for all your tools and tips. And what I take away from it is be really.
Oh, you just muted yourself.
Sorry. There
What
we
you
go.
take away?
Yeah, my takeaway is be really clear on what you want. Build a connection so you don't see the other person as an adversary, see them as an ally. And the third takeaway for me is drop your anchor as far as you dare. Those are great pieces of advice. Thank you very much. And thanks for spending the time with us. Our next upcoming webinar is for Sophia Wealth Academy is on setting personal boundaries. And it's with Sony Barron. Please visit sophiawealthacademy.com and find the registration links there. Thank you again for sharing your evening with us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.